What if the reason someone stopped missing you had nothing to do with how much you loved them, and everything to do with how available you made yourself? There's a quiet psychological truth most people discover too late. Longing doesn't grow in the presence of certainty. It grows in the presence of absence, not physical absence alone, but the absence of guaranteed access. The moment someone knows you'll always be there, always respond, always explain yourself, always wait, the emotional tension that makes them want you begins to dissolve. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding one of the most fundamental patterns in human psychology. We don't truly value what we believe we cannot lose. Today, we're exploring what actually makes someone miss your presence. Not the version you perform for them, but the version that exists fully, independently, and without apology. The first pattern worth examining is what psychologists call anxious pursuit, and it's where most people unconsciously dismantle their own value. When someone pulls back, the natural human response is to close the gap, to text more, to check in, to over-explain, to emotionally manage the distance as though it's your responsibility to fix. But here's what that behavior actually communicates to the other person's subconscious. You are not going anywhere. And the mind doesn't miss what it believes is permanent. Silence, on the other hand, creates something far more powerful than any message ever could. It creates uncertainty. And uncertainty activates attention. When you stop being predictable, you become interesting again. Not because you've changed, but because the other person can no longer take your presence for granted. The second pattern is equally counterintuitive. Nothing registers in someone's mind quite like watching your world continue without them. Not performed happiness. Not forced reinvention. Real momentum. Real growth. Real evidence that your life has direction independent of their involvement. When someone checks in on your world, consciously or not, and sees expansion rather than stagnation, something uncomfortable stirs in them. The realization that they might not be part of what comes next. And that realization does something that no amount of convincing ever could. It makes your absence feel like a loss. There's a third layer here that goes even deeper than strategy or behavior. Psychologists who study emotional memory have found that we don't actually miss people the way we think we do. We miss the feeling of who we were around them. We miss the version of ourselves that existed in their presence. This is why the women or men who leave the deepest impressions aren't necessarily the most available ones or the most persistent ones. They're the ones who made life feel clearer, calmer, more alive, more like the person you always wanted to be. When your presence brought ease instead of anxiety, inspiration instead of pressure, warmth without desperation. Your absence doesn't just get noticed. It gets felt. In the middle of an ordinary day. In the quiet before sleep. In moments that have nothing to do with you and yet somehow circle back. That's psychological association at work. A shared phrase. A specific kind of laughter. A feeling of being genuinely understood. These things embed themselves in memory in ways that grand gestures never do. And every time something triggers that association, your presence walks back into the room. Uninvited, undeniable. There's also something worth understanding about emotional availability. When your response to someone's attention is immediate, anxious, and emotionally exposed, you're not creating connection. You're creating dependency on their approval. And people don't miss those they feel responsible for. They miss those who chose them freely, from a place of fullness, not need. Calm, grounded responses carry an entirely different psychological weight. They communicate. I'm glad you're here, but my world was full before you arrived. And that fullness, that sense of a life already in motion, is one of the most quietly magnetic qualities a person can carry. So what does this actually look like in practice? It doesn't look like manipulation. It doesn't look like withholding or emotional games or engineering jealousy. Those tactics are transparent, and they corrode the very connection you're trying to protect. It looks like letting your silence speak when words would only diminish you. It looks like living genuinely, with friends, with purpose, with plans that exist because you find them meaningful, not because you're hoping someone is watching. It looks like responding when you feel moved to respond, not within seconds of every notification. It looks like carrying yourself as someone whose emotional landscape isn't entirely dependent on one person's choices. And most importantly, It looks like building a life so genuinely full that your absence creates a void not because you engineered it, but because you actually brought something irreplaceable when you were present. The person who is truly hard to forget isn't the one who tried the hardest to be remembered. It's the one who made every moment of presence feel like something worth returning to. You cannot convince someone to miss you. You cannot explain your way into someone's longing. You cannot chase your way into someone's appreciation. But you can build a life so rooted, so alive, so genuinely yours, that the moment your energy leaves a room, the room notices. That's not a strategy. That's the quiet power of a person who finally stopped shrinking themselves to fit into someone else's comfort and started taking up exactly the space they were always meant to occupy.